Thank you so much, Rachel. And, I get the privilege today of having a conversation with some great leaders in transportation who are not only, leaders in their respective states and also for the nation, but are also really dear friends of mine. And as part of my introduction, you all know Carlos Braceras as the director of the Utah DOT, Jennifer Cohan, who is Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, and David Kim, who is Secretary of CalSTA in California. So he's got transportation, DMV, and for those TV aficionados, CHIPS, California Highway Patrol. And I was picturing him going down the freeway on his motorbike. But as part of my introduction, I'll tell a small story about each of them. Carlos, I met him a long time ago, and we were in Mississippi, and he actually said, I think I'm going to go swim the Mississippi River. And what I know now is that Carlos is a real fitness buff and actually could have swum the Mississippi River. At the time, I thought he had just had, maybe too many refreshments at the reception. But Carlos is a passionate leader, really cares about this stuff. Jennifer Cohan was the DMV director when I was the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware. And when I got there, people were like, you got to watch out for this Jennifer person. And what I learned through working with Jennifer is watch out means she fights very hard for what she believes in. And she's an amazing leader and just a great personal connection there. And then David Kim and I, David actually had invited me to a hockey game in DC when we were both at USDOT as appointees. And I stood him up that night because I was on my first date with a lady who became my wife. And David still gives me grief about skipping a hockey game for that. And David actually took over my role at Federal Highways when I went to Delaware. And David is now obviously 8 years as an Obama appointee and now in California. So this is the roster for this group discussion. And we're going to jump right in. We often talk about safety being our number one priority in transportation, and a lot of focus on all the deaths from COVID-19 and what state DOTs are doing. But what we're also hearing and learning is that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is going to potentially take action in August to take away a big chunk, 45 megahertz of the safety band, the safety spectrum that was set aside for transportation safety. And while we've all been focused on deaths from COVID-19 and this global pandemic, in transportation, we've often talked about the 37,000 people who die every year. And so, Carlos, you've been a leader in this fight, both as chair of ITS America, your roles in AASHTO and in Utah. Why would you say the FCC should leave all 75 megahertz of the spectrum with the safety community?
Thank you, Shailen, and thank you to the members of this panel for this opportunity. First of all, I believe strongly that the safety spectrum is that lever. It's really going to provide that inflection point for that massive change in transportation safety. If you look back in history and you look at our fatality rates and you look at where we've seen big drops in those fatality rates, you can tie them directly to these changes that have happened. The use of seatbelts, the mandatory use of seatbelts, ABS brakes. I believe that this safety spectrum will provide, because I still know it will provide that type of drop in our fatality rates that's going to improve safety dramatically in the country. And it's critical that we maintain the safety spectrum. We did, it's easy to look at the FCC and say that they're evil and even considering to do something like this. But, once you get to know people, it's hard to really call them, to refer to them in that way. We had Chairman Pai, chairman of the FCC, out here in Utah, and I had a chance to sit down and we had lunch and we explained what we're doing with it. We have an operational system where we're communicating right now. Our traffic signals are communicating with our buses. Our signals are communicating with our snowplows. So when our blades are down, we're getting preemption for our plows so that we can clear our roads faster and have safer roadways. And when I explained everything that we're doing to Chairman Pai, he completely understood what we're trying to do, but he also has a vision of telemedicine, and his parents were rural doctors, and he has a vision of being able to provide better telemedicine. And I think during this pandemic, we've all seen how telemedicine, I think, is there was resistance to the past, and now we're starting to see more acceptance of it. So he has a vision. He's a good man trying to do the right thing. But I strongly believe that this safety spectrum, we've been working on this in transportation for the last 25 years, and it's ready to launch. It's being used today, and it's ready to launch in a very meaningful way. So I feel that this is the wrong decision. And personally, it's going to affect us. We're using these pieces of the spectrum that they're proposing to, quote, give away. So we're going to keep our eyes on this very closely, Shailen.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Carlos. And we're not using terms like evil, but I think it's just so incredibly frustrating for those of us who are passionate about safety. I agree with you. The getting vehicles to talk to each other, getting vehicles to talk to vulnerable road users, pedestrians and cyclists and people on scooters. And what is frustrating about it is Chairman Pai was just actually in India and gave a speech and talked about how 5G was going to lead to a massive uptick in video gaming. And that's really important in all the things that the FCC has to look at. But from a safety perspective, and Jennifer, I'd love for you to weigh in on, just the safety benefits of the spectrum.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Carlos, I even like the evil term. I think because from the outside, from where we sit each day, it does seem that way. It seems very, very one-sided and just reckless, for lack of a better term. But now it's even more important to bring this back up and push as hard as we can now. Because if you look, we're now in this era of contactless, right? So making sure that the automation is there and that the communication tools are there. Again, it's never been more important than it is right now. And I'm a firm believer in never wasting a good crisis. So if we can, make another push, I think we can use this current situation as this is where we got to get, and we got there very quickly. I can tell you in Delaware, we went from 2,500 people, and half of them were in telecommuting within, a week. So we know we can move fast when we need to. And I think that now is the time to make even more of a bold statement. And I'm perfectly fine using the term evil.
Yes, Jennifer, that's why you are the chair of ITS America. And, I agree that there are a lot of benefits. And this, I think, is sort of central to our argument with the FCC, which is that, we're open to sharing. We're open to sharing the safety spectrum, for telemedicine, for rural broadband access. But there was testing that was supposed to be done that the FCC has never finished. That they now say, well, we just don't need it in order to, to use it safely and to make sure that critical safety messages are not competing with video games and other forms of media that are out there. And so I think it's particularly ill-timed. David, you had your time at USDOT. You also did some work with Hyundai. And now you're in California. What's your take on the safety spectrum?
Thanks, Shailen. And before I answer that, one more anecdote to add to your story about the hockey game. I think we jokingly say that was the best $50 you wasted on a ticket, because that led to a lifelong partner. So that was great.
Yeah, you and I share similar ways in which we phrase things about my marriage, and then I get into trouble from my wife. So yeah, it was a great investment. Great investment.
It was, for sure. Critically important issue. When I got here about a year ago, got the briefing on California's safety situation, was alarmed at the number of fatalities and serious injuries involving pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, passengers, all the trends going in the wrong direction. So I said to our team, we have to undertake new and novel strategies to tackle this problem. Definitely stick with the tried and true, but also at the same time, we got to try something new and different. And to that end, having access to spectrum so we can eventually deploy CV to X is critically important. And as you mentioned, I spent a couple of years in the auto industry with Hyundai, and I can tell you from an auto perspective, they're all on board. They feel like they've got the right approach to making sure that their vehicles are outfitted so that they can communicate with one another, as well as roadside infrastructure. So I think you've got a great coalition of automakers and all of us in the transportation world ready to join forces and make a strong pitch for preserving the spectrum.
Yeah, and you raise a great point. I mean, there are obviously automakers that are heavily involved, but we've brought a lot of different stakeholders to the table. We've had Mothers Against Drunk Driving who have been involved, cycling organizations, pedestrians, and again, I just feel like, at ITS America, we talk about our vision for the future, one that is safer, greener, and smarter, and underlying all of that are sort of these smart cities that we talk about, where vehicles don't run into pedestrians or cyclists because they're communicating with each other. And actually, when I think about this, I actually think that the future is less about vehicles talking to other things, and it's infrastructure talking to everything, I to X. And so taking away the spectrum now, we're on the cusp of connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, this infrastructure to everything moment does seem short-sighted. So we're going to continue leading in this fight, and just appreciate all of your support for it. So coming back to this idea of technology, and 2020 has certainly turned out to be a very different year than any of us have imagined. I've seen some great memes on the internet of the DeLorean from Back to the Future that with the engine blown out, and other people saying 2020 is adding you on Facebook and do not accept, because it just seems like halfway through the year, everything that could have gone wrong has. And so I'm just curious, as DOT leaders, you always have your sort of eye on the future and what you're building towards, and then you have to deal with the tactical everyday pieces. So how has COVID, sort of impacted you all from where you're trying to take your agencies, and how you're dealing with the sort of day-to-day craziness that's come with it?
I can start if you want.
Yeah.
So in Delaware, there was good and bad. So like I said before, we have about 2,500 employees, including DMV and tolls and transit. We were able to have almost half of them telecommute in a week. That was just phenomenal. To be able to do something that fast was great. But then protecting the rest of them was our number one priority. So making sure everybody had the proper PPE. We're still working on that as new things come on the market, whether it's thermal detectors, in front of our DMVs, so when customers come in, they automatically are scanned without our people having to take their temperature. So we're seeing a lot of those, I keep saying contactlessness eras, and that's where we're at. And the more those come online, we'll deploy those. But we in Delaware, our governor deemed state government and construction essential. So we never lost a beat as far as construction went, which was really good, because if you look back at the last 4 months in Delaware, that construction, that highway construction and the engineering and everything that goes along with it was basically holding up our economy. It was the only non-medical, the only non-food distribution that was actually out in full force. And silver lining on that is that traffic levels were down so much, and I know both Carlos and David, you probably experienced this as well. We were able to get more aggressive with delivering some of our projects. So we delivered $100 million worth of projects in the last 5 months. So that was great. We definitely have fiscal challenges. We're good for probably the next 18 months, but then we're going to fall off a cliff. So we're going to have to solve that. But it was more important for us to make sure that we had the dollars to keep all of the construction jobs, engineering jobs working. We did not have to lay off any employees. We didn't have to take salary cuts, none of that. And proud to say we have the only DMV in the country that was open through this entire thing. So good and bad, but pride there.
Yeah, well, you use an important word, which is essential, in terms of the jobs, and we're going to come back to that in a bit. Carlos, a lot of the conversations I have with people now are all about, what happens with transit. And I know that you and I have talked many times about how integrated transit is with DOT traffic operations in Utah. It's a great model for a lot of places. I think now the consensus is that there are a lot of questions around transit and when people will want to get back on, what percentage of people will, choose to take it. And the consensus being a lot of people who may have been on transit before will be back in their cars. But then telework comes in. So, from a traffic management perspective, how are you trying to forecast the future, and what are some of the technology steps that you're looking at to try to manage things?
Yeah, I think it's, thank you for that, Shailen. we're in such an interesting time right now because our world is changing almost on a daily basis, and we're reacting to those changes. And it's really easy, I think, as an organization, as a leadership in an organization, to find your focus, fighting those fires, getting into that mosh pit, and losing sight of where you want to take that agency into the future. So you have to do both. You have to be able to look at today and try to figure out how you're going to deal with today's problems to keep the business running. But you also have to be thinking for the future. And for me, there was two pieces to this. There's one, it's what I consider the foundation to our success. It's really keeping that culture of people moving forward and making sure that that is prepared for the future. Because you're not going to be an innovative agency. You're not going to be able to implement the new technologies that we're dependent on to get this transportation future unless you are focused on maintaining that culture within your organization. And so I think that's critical. Now, as you think about where we want to go, as you know, Utah is it's a big state. It's very rural state. It's also the 8th most urbanized state in the country, meaning that over 85% of our people live in an urbanized area. And our future mobility really is incumbent on a growing transit system. Now, we have a great transit system right now. We have, 5 light rail systems in the urbanized areas. We've got, this is small stuff for you guys, 100-mile commuter rail systems, streetcars, BRT systems. And our dependency for the future was on that growing. And I did another webinar earlier this morning on asset management we had 3 different transit providers on there. And they talked about their projections for the future and really, are we at the bottom and what that trajectory looks like for bringing that ridership back. And various projections there, but it's multiple years right now before we get the confidence back, we get that ridership back. And so we're strongly dependent on transit success. So we're trying to figure out, how does this impact our long-range plans, and what does it mean today versus what we need to plan for in the future? But also that telework piece. We went from, just like Jennifer said, we turned a switch and we went, 40% of our employees went to telework, and we still have about 700 people that are teleworking. And as I talk to corporate leaders in Utah, and there's a lot of empty commercial real estate right now. And they do not expect to see, 100% come back into the office, even when we're past pandemic. There's an expectation that probably 30% of the people that will continue to telework into this future, and that's going to have a huge impact. So for us right now, we're trying to think that this is a long-term picture, and we're not going to react to where we are today, because if I were to try to connect dots based on where I've been over the last 2 months, I would be painting a very bleak picture for the future. And so what we're trying to say is we need to work through this. Do not panic. Stick with your plans that you had in place. Be prepared to react. But let's look at this over the next year to 2 years in terms of what this means for a future of transportation.
Yeah, I can, if you were trying to connect dots on what 2020 has been, it would look like some kind of crazy art piece.
Yeah.
And so David, from a California perspective, you've got a big state and a big agency. I used to actually sit beside Malcolm Doherty, who was the Caltrans director at a lot of the meetings. And I used to say this because they wanted the 2 powerhouses from the coast, Delaware and California, side by side. So very similar states. What are you trying to do? You were standing up your team, you were getting things going, and then how has this impacted you?
Yeah, if you think back to the early days of the pandemic, it became so apparent that it was important to keep our eye on the supply chain and make sure that it keeps moving. And so that was one of the areas we focused on at the outset. And you go back to the first month or two, March, April, I think all of us had a situation where essential goods like medical supplies, grocery items, agricultural products, and so forth had a really hard time getting to their final destination, or they were in extremely limited supply or simply not even available. And so I think the crisis really put a spotlight on the importance of freight and goods movement like never before. And I think there's greater public awareness of the role of commercial long-haul truckers, freight rail, ports, distribution centers, and so forth, and what each of them do, what is their role to help move products through the economy. And so I think many of us may have taken for granted just how complex it is for supplies to travel from point A to point B, how do they ultimately get into the hands of consumers? And so early on, we held weekly conference calls with all of the players in the freight and goods movement world, ports, truckers, airports, and various others, simply to hear from them what was happening on the ground and try to work with them to resolve problems in real time. And as a result of those conversations, we took steps on a couple of different fronts. First was to increase truck capacity. We temporarily raised truck weight limits to 80,000 pounds for emergency relief deliveries. And this was made possible thanks to regulatory relief actions taken by US DOT and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And then the second thing, we heard loud and clear from commercial truck drivers that it was incredibly difficult to get meals on the road. Can you imagine driving all day while trying to survive on snacks? That would make any of us grumpy, and that's what truckers had to endure since most restaurants are not open. And so the governor signed an executive order that allowed food truck vendors to operate at interstate rest areas and sell their products. And so we went all out in letting food truck vendors know that they could set up shop at a rest area and sell their food to travelers, especially the truckers. And word spread quickly throughout the trucking community that certain rest areas had food trucks there and good meals were available. So freight and goods movement and all the logistics that go with it that's something we focused on at the outset, and it's still a priority, especially as we go through another round of closures.
Yeah, I drove from Michigan to DC and stopped at a truck stop, and you know the little rollers with the hot dogs on it, they're empty, and I was like, wow, I'm like, that's, you know, things are real when there are no extruded pork products just grilling in those stations. You know, on the freight piece and technology, I know a lot of states were engaged in allowing for platooning of trucks. You know, that's another connected vehicle application. We have a question in the chat bar here. As technology continues to advance so quickly and government moves not as quickly, how does a state DOT make technological investments without it becoming obsolete at the time of implementation? And Carlos, you're doing some work with Panasonic that, you know, we had started in Colorado. But all of you know, how do you deploy technology that's on a very rapid pace of evolution and not by the yesterday's technology when you finally get it to market?
Yeah, Shailen, you want me to go first, or? Okay. Yeah, that's a huge issue for a DOT. Then, you know, when we talk about assets that we manage that are on a 15, 20, or even 30, 50-year lifespan, and all of a sudden now we're investing in technology and we're becoming dependent on that technology for the day-to-day operation of our transportation system. It's a completely different mindset, and we've been concerned about the ability to keep up. And as a DOT in the past, we used to actually invest in writing our own code and developing our own applications because we wanted our applications to run exactly the way we do our business today. And we made a conscious choice about 15 years ago that we weren't keeping up. We just can't keep up with how fast technology moves. So we're very much in the business now of purchasing services. So not as much purchasing, you know, the hardware and owning the software, but purchasing services. So getting into a business arrangement. You mentioned Panasonic, the partnership that we've been into now for over a year. We have a system deployed, and it's the type of system that is going to be able to grow as technology evolves, and we're going to be able to keep up with that technology. But it's a different mindset for governments to be able to try to keep up with how fast it moves. But I am a strong believer that as organizations, we need to be fully committed to keep up with those technology advances. Otherwise, we're going to become obsolete and we're not going to be able to do our basic mission of saving lives.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to echo exactly what Carlos was alluding to, but I think it also goes back to the point of culture. You know, state government, we're risk adverse. It's just how we're made. But if you create in your DOT a culture of innovation and give them the ability to take some risks, and we, in Delaware, we created our tech and innovation. They were just called IT. Now they're technology and innovation, and just give them the freedom to, take some risks, try new stuff out. We're pretty excited. We're getting ready to roll out our mobile driver's license. So that's something that's really exciting, and using the modern technology for that. We have the Del.app, which has got, all of our cameras, all of our Bluetooth, basically everything that we have public facing to be able to manage traffic. So I think it really comes to creating that culture of innovation, Shailen, that makes sure, we all got great, really smart and innovative employees, and shout out to all the Del Dot folks who are tuned in. Thank you guys. But creating that culture is very important.
Yes, definitely a shout out to all the Del Dot employees who are tuned in. Your leadership has certainly increased since 2014. Big change at that point. But, on that point of innovation culture, Jennifer, you're probably one of the best leaders I know around encouraging, people. And it's very easy for leaders to go out and say, we want you to take a risk. It's when something goes wrong that you actually have to back them up. And I think you're really great at that. And Carlos, I mean, we've had many conversations about how you are a product of a culture of innovation. Going back, John Nord, and before that, Tom Warren. And, I think that your DOT is probably the best DOT out there. So maybe, because technology involves a lot of risk. As a leader who has put people, bridge in a weekend, and then dozens of bridges in a weekend, right? It's very easy to become the former director of the Utah DOT if something goes wrong. So how have you continued to create that culture of innovation around technology?
Yeah, I think this is, Jennifer brings up just such an important point about the culture. How a leader reacts when a mistake happens is going to set the tone whether or not your agency is going to be innovative or not. And think about how you've reacted, what your facial expression might have been when somebody came in and told you that we made a mistake or something broke or this happened. And that will tell you how innovative your organization is. I remember over 30 years ago in a job interview I had at this Department of Transportation, when I got the question that every one of us should be ready for every single time in a job interview, and it's that softball, you should be ready to hit it out of the park. And I hadn't thought through ahead of time, and they asked me the question, what's your greatest skill? And I said, well, I can make more mistakes faster than anyone else. And I was like, crap, did I say that? And then I quickly added, I thought to fix it, but I won't make the same mistake twice. And so we try to emphasize the fact that the only people that don't make mistakes are the people that do nothing. And so we want to have an organization that is willing to step forward and try something. We ask them to stay within the parameters of our values as an organization. So understand our values, but step forward, try something. And if you make a mistake, and you stayed within our values, I will always have your back. And you have to keep reinforcing that, because it's easy to say when things are going good, but it's when it hits the fan is when you have to reinforce it. And that will set the bedrock on which you can build an organization for innovation.
Yeah, I've worked for 3 governors and 1 president. And, and David, you probably spend more time in San Francisco than I do now. I don't spend any time in San Francisco now, but in that tech world in Silicon Valley, I would often hear from people, I was telling my people to fail, but fail quickly. And having worked for 3 governors and 1 president, nobody in the public sector ever tells you to fail quickly or slowly. Very different, ideas. And how, one, I wanted you to touch on that culture piece. But then there's another question that had come in, and I think you are part of that group of states that just came out on the electrification piece, and trying to get to getting to zero emission vehicles. So maybe touching on this culture of innovation, and then applying that to this transition to zero emission vehicles.
Right. Well, first of all, Carlos, I love your anecdote. We should all be prepared for that question in the future. So thank you for.
I wasn't.
That's a great answer, though. Yeah, Shailen, thank you for mentioning electric vehicles. We are going all out and really pushing the envelope when it comes to deployment of electric vehicles, which includes both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell, and doing everything possible to expand the network of charging infrastructure and putting in place ambitious targets for the future. You referenced the agreement that a bunch of states, including California and others, signed yesterday, which sets a target for medium and heavy duty electric vehicles, so commercial long-haul truckers, for example, Those are ambitious targets, but we think it's important if we're going to achieve our very ambitious climate goals. And so we're doing everything possible to encourage, nudge both users as well as industry and everyone else to really go all out and working with private sector developers to help us expand the network of charging. There are lots of EV charging points in California, but we still have a ways to go. And that is especially the case when it comes to hydrogen fuel cell. We have about 40 hydrogen stations in California. It's good, but we need to get to 100 to have critical mass. So we're going all out, we're pushing the metal, and we still have a ways to go.
Yeah. I chair an external advisory board for DOE, and it's all the labs, and they're doing some cool works at these DOE labs. And, you know, I think that collaboration between transportation, energy, and some of these other sectors, you know, a lot of states, Colorado included, used some of the money from the VW settlement to put into charging stations. So I think that is certainly a trend. And we know internal combustion engines are going to be here for a while, but electrification, you know, we often talk about connected, autonomous, shared, and electric as the way of the future, or ACEs is another way to put that. So glad to see your leadership there. But to the extent that we have more electric vehicles on the road, as noble and as wonderful as that is, that provides a greater challenge for the gas tax, which provides the majority of fuel. And we have other threats as well. We have the authorization of the FAST Act that runs out at the end of September. You know, Jennifer, you touched on you're good for 18 months. Some states, I remember Carlos saying to a group of folks in Colorado, and the governor included, you know, we've got enough money in transportation in Utah for my, you know, the next generation to be okay. So they're sort of like all the way out there. You've got 18 months. I know there are other states that are just right up against it in terms of billing to projects. So, you know, all three of you have been involved. We'll start with Jennifer, but what's kind of needed? You talked about the essential nature of these jobs. What is needed from a federal leadership perspective at this point?
Sure, thank you. But one quick clarification, Shailen, to a statement that you made earlier about the Utah DOT being the best DOT in the country. I will put Delaware DOT up against Utah DOT anytime.
Let's go, Jennifer.
Making the clarification.
Thank you.
You're totally right. I mean, it's more important. We've got to have it. We've got to have long-term sustainable funding. You know, we've all been preaching the same thing. You know, there's lots of activity going on in Congress right now, which we're happy to see. We just hope that we get something before it becomes a lame duck situation. But it really, we can't keep relying on the federal gas tax. We just can't do it. You know, in both bills that we've seen, we see additional funding for some, you know, alternative mileage-based user fee or VMT. Here in Delaware, you know, we're the lead in the I-95 Corridor Coalition working on that. But we need strong leadership. And if we're going to continue, and we can even make the strong statement now that jobs are dependent on that reauthorization, not just state DOT jobs, but construction jobs, you know, trucking jobs, all of those jobs. So I think keeping the pressure on and hoping that we get something done soon is really, really important. And I have two senators who are very, as you know, very involved with what's happening over there with reauthorization right now.
Yeah, for those who haven't been to Delaware, if you have a groundbreaking or any kind of big event, it is not
this morning.
It is not unusual to have the governor, a representative from the House of Representatives, two U.S. senators, and then a bevy of state representatives. Doesn't leave a lot of time for loquaciousness from secretaries of transportation. We're more like just trying to get all the important people to speak. David or Carlos, your thoughts on the federal outlook and what can be done?
Well, Shailen, now I understand why you left Delaware. You weren't given enough opportunity to speak. It's I'll add a little bit here. I don't think we as a transportation professionals have done a good job of talking about the why we need to have a transportation system, why we need a national transportation system. And I think we devolve ourselves more when we devolve to talking about the stuff when we start talking about bridges or pavement needs or technology needs for transportation, we need to be talking about the why in terms of why do people care? Why do people need a transportation system? They need a transportation system to, improve their quality of life, to improve the economy. And it's things that, when it works, they don't know it's there, but when it doesn't work, they certainly know transportation isn't there. So we need to evolve our conversation into one that connects more with people in terms of why they should care about transportation. Now, I did tell your former governor that I think I statement I said is we have on the state transportation side, we have a financially sustainable transportation system. We certainly have holes for our transit system, and our local road system are certainly in need of more funding. But at the state side, we have been and we are still in a I think a very good position. On the gas tax side, I just want to mention, I'm a strong believer that we need to find a way to transition from the gas tax, which has lost its ability, because I'm a strong believer in user pay. When people understand a direct connection between, if I'm going to use this service, this is what it's going to cost me, they're going to choose to use that system responsibly. And we're seeing a disconnect in the gas tax with the ability to, with funding. And so I'm a strong believer in going to a vehicle miles traveled fee. We have an operational system now. We've got just under 3,000 people that are paying real money in lieu of paying their vehicle registration fees, and they're paying a mileage-based fee. We're under, I was going to say strict orders by the legislature, but you're always under strict orders from your legislature to propose transitioning a path towards our entire vehicle fleet to go to a vehicle miles driven. And so that's going to be definitely the future for Utah. I believe it needs to be a future for the federal government as well, because we need to have a federal transportation system. There's a need for the great transportation system in Delaware to support the businesses in Utah. And we need that national transportation system, so we need federal funding for it. And so we need a way forward, we need a future. And quite honestly, they've been kicking the can down the road in terms of funding to this point. And we need them to step forward and be bold and provide that vision for a national transportation system.
Well, Carlos, you can clarify your comments all you want, but my memory of that, it was like Michael Jordan going up and dunking on somebody like right in their face. In fact, the governor stood up and was like, in the face, in the face. So yeah. But your comments might have been a little more accurate. David, from your time at the federal level, your time in DC, and now seeing it on the ground in California, what are your thoughts on getting some more federal funding?
Yeah, and to pick up on Carlos's point, I think we can all agree that we need a new revenue mechanism, and the gas tax is not the way forward in terms of the future. And so, similar to Utah and Delaware and other states, California has experimented with, and we've done demonstration projects to test the viability of a road user charge. We did a huge demo project in 2017 before I got here, involving 5,000 drivers. We're planning for the next phase of that demonstration project. And so I think that's really important. I agree, we need a national framework to set that policy. In terms of funding, and yes, FAST Act is coming to an end in a few months, and I think we're all realistic. We know that it's not likely to happen this year, but next year. But I am encouraged by what has come out of the House as well as the Senate. And it's not just funding, although funding is important to be sure, but I think we need to get the policies right and be able to not just bounce back, but bounce forward. So policies on climate change, resiliency, intercity passenger rail, transit, electric vehicles, all of those things, investment in technology. And I think you see that in both the House bill as well as the Senate bill. I have to mention the Senate bill since we have the Secretary of DelDOT here, as well as the former Secretary of DelDOT. You've got Senator Carper, who's done a great job. And that bill coming out of Senate EPW was really great. It was a nice surprise to see that bill so heavily focused on resiliency and climate change, similar to what the House did in the Invest in America Act. So although it's not going to happen this year, I am encouraged by what we've seen so far. And I think it really sets the stage for something transformative, hopefully next year.
Yeah. So, Carlos, you touched on the why, and I think the why is incredibly important. And, we all work in transportation. technology and transportation is sort of that intersection where ITS America plays. But, at the end of the day, it's about people. And, like there's all this cool technology out there and, automated vehicles and connected vehicles and smart cities of the future. But at the end of the day, it's about people and how this can make their lives better. And so, Jennifer, we often talk about equity and things, and those issues have clearly come to the forefront of late. From your perspective, how do we harness technology and infrastructure investments and put people and equity at the center of it?
So, and I saw that question in the chat box, and it really struck me. And Shailen, I've been on my soapbox. I believe mobility is a right. There has historically been, equity issues for people of color and women, whether it is an interstate that divided a city or the heavily reliant on public transportation for women and minorities. But I think you can actually flip that on its head, because it goes back to the why. The why is to try to make their lives better. So using the technology to make their lives better. And when I say they, I mean all. But just to put it in perspective, we have 2 autonomous shuttles. And if there is a COVID hotspot in, an underserved area, we could send test kits in there. Or those persons with disabilities, Delaware is the only state in the country that has door-to-door paratransit service. They're our most vulnerable folks right now. And being able to use technology to let them know, hey, your trip is coming, your bus is coming, and then relay to the caretaker, at that time they made it to their hospital or their appointment. So really use the technology to address the equity, but making sure that you pay special attention to those that need you most.
Yeah, I think
I'll get off my soapbox right now.
you can get on that soapbox. One of the more sort of memories that are seared into my memory. I had just become a father in Delaware, and a parent of one of our paratransit shuttles got a hold of me, got my phone, and called me and laid into me for about 30 minutes because one of our, a mistake had occurred, and their child had been left at the mall. And I probably had a different perspective on it because I was just a parent of a newborn at the time, and thinking like, well, this little child grows up and has needs, and somebody left them. And it really, on the transit piece, and David, you talked about transit, and Carlos, you've talked about this as well, but many of us who make decisions in transportation, we're not reliant on transit getting there in order to get to work and to get to jobs and to get to see our loved ones. And I think that is something that we need to have a lot of humility around as we make tough budgetary decisions, to make sure that we understand that not everybody can just get in a car and go somewhere. I don't know. Any thoughts on the equity pieces from you, Carlos or David?
Well, I'll just say that it is we're at a time right now where I think we should consider ourselves lucky that the public is raising this to a level of attention that I haven't seen before. I was too young in the 60s to really understand what was going on. But we are having almost daily protests in our streets talking about equity and the issues that people are facing, people that don't have the same benefits that we have had. And I will honestly say about myself, I never appreciated the benefits I had in growing up as a kid in suburban New Jersey. And I have now more than ever come face to face with the fact that I have had benefits that a lot of people have not had. And it's a big conversation right now in our DOT. I will tell you that we are about to launch on an effort. I can't really say it until Thursday, till the governor says it first, but we're going to have a statewide effort to help people in state government understand what is out there in terms of people's, how people have felt and how they've been dealt with in the past. And we can definitely do better as a society. And I think it's so exciting. We're at an opportunity where we can make a difference, and we can realize that American dream that we all have believed in, but has not really been there for everybody.
Yeah, That's really powerful to hear you say that, and to hear, that that your eyes have been opened. And I think that particularly from an infrastructure standpoint, we often point to the interstate system as this transformative thing for the United States, and Eisenhower saw it in Germany, and then came back to the U.S. and was like, we got to have one of those, and it got built, and it allowed for America in the 20th century, to be the preeminent economy. But when you drive with your eyes open, sort of from this perspective, a lot of those interstates were put through communities that certainly didn't see advantages from it, and in many cases were destroyed. And so as we plan this infrastructure for the 21st century, I think it's incredibly important that we weave those pieces in. David, your thoughts on the equity piece?
Yeah, we put out a statement about a month ago on systemic racism, equity, inclusion, and justice. And what we say in the statement is, first of all, we acknowledge that transportation decisions of the past have literally divided communities, upended communities, and have harmed disadvantaged communities and people of color. And that we stand against systemic racism. And as an agency, we will do everything possible to look at all issues through an equity lens to make sure that we are incorporating issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity in all of our decisions going forward. And I think it's really important for people to know, because those of us in transportation are aware of those decisions of the past, but not everybody. And whether it's the development of the interstate system or freight rail, intercity passenger rail, you name it, systemic racism has long been a part of our transportation system as we know it. And we have to own up to it and own it and take steps. Now, I know that statements like that only go so far. In the end, it's our actions that will make a difference, hopefully, and the results we achieve. So that's our goal, to take that statement and do the next step, which is to implement those policies and actions that will hopefully lead to better outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, I think that is the key, right? So we've all got the words, and now we have to put our money where our mouth is. So last question to you, Jennifer. As chair of ITS America, you've championed this idea of mobility as a right. How does that dovetail with a lot of the conversations that are going on right now?
Well, yeah, thank you, Shailen. And it actually just kind of emphasizes it even more. And I think what the civil unrest in our country has actually been able to move the conversation, like Carlos said. And I was talking about this before that, and I was talking about this before COVID. So, it is, although, it's unrest, but I think it's productive. I think it's productive unrest. And I think you're going to see a lot of comprehensive change coming out. And I think, especially focusing on that public transportation piece, even how we design communities, I think is going to change. And I think it's going to change for the better. So I'm just, I'm glad that, I always believe in the silver lining, that one of the good things that's coming out of it is that, we're going to do things smarter and better for all. So mobility as a right for all.
Well, there's that ancient saying, may you live in interesting times. And, as a student of history, there are seminal moments or inflection points in history where it's the Model T, or it's World War II, or, the dawn of aviation. I really feel like we're living through an inflection point where, history was going like this, and then we're not sure which direction it'll go, but it'll certainly be something that we can look back on and point to. And what I would just say to all the people who are watching this right now, I can't think of three better leaders to be guiding, their respective states and being national leaders at this time. And I'm just really honored that you guys took some time to do this, and really privileged to call you a friend as well as a colleague. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to everybody who attended, and please stay safe.
You too.
Thank you, Shailen.
Yeah.